Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another Falconry video. Today we are going to be talking about Peregrine Falcons, and we're going to be celebrating a very special day today, August 20th. That's why I'm posting this video specifically on this day. It's a very special day, and one that I think as we move forward, a lot of people aren't aware of why it's important and why it's special to falconry, captive breeding, the Peregrine Falcon, and conservation in general. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about why we're celebrating peregrines today on August 20th, and I'm also going to be talking about and some of the history as to why. And then at the end, I'm going to take a very different spin and bring up some points that we should still be conscientious about. So the Peregrine Falcon, if you know me, if you follow my videos, you're aware that the Lanner Falcon is my favorite falcon because of its natural history and its ancient cultural history, particularly to the ancient Egyptians. I just love Lanner Falcons. But the Peregrine Falcon, that's the one that has a soft spot in my heart. The whole reason I am a falconer is because of the Peregrine Falcon. That is the species that captivated my imagination and pulled me in when I was 9 years old and got me into this, to the art of falconry. And one of the parts of that process was reading the fictional novel, My Side of the Mountain, written by Jean Craighead George. If you haven't read it, go out and read it. It's an easy read. It's fiction, but it's a lot of fun. And where the boy has a falcon, he trains a peregrine falcon named Frightful. Many of your older falconers, and probably some of the newer ones too, will attribute the reason they got into falconry because of that novel. And it's a big part of the reason why I did as well. But I grew up in the 1900s, okay? And I grew up with the Peregrine Falcon being called an endangered species. Now, Peregrine Falcons, the word peregrine means wanderer or traveler because they live almost everywhere in the world. They have a long, rich history in falconry, and the reason I love them so much is, in my opinion, they are the pinnacle falcon to hunt with. Of all the falcon species, especially with traditional large falcon hunting styles, if you said, Ben, you get one falcon, what species are you picking? Without any other information, I'd be like, bam, peregrine. Because they are so intelligent, so comparatively loyal, they understand more easily what we're trying to accomplish as a falconer. They just seem to somehow get it. They strike hard. They are generally considered to be the fastest animal on the planet. You'll hear different numbers of the speed, but regardless, in a dive, they can travel several hundred miles an hour, which squarely makes them the fastest animal on the planet. But one of the big thing that I was always told growing up, the Peregrine Falcon is an endangered species. And in Utah, we have an old historic hotel downtown. It was called the Hotel Utah. And we had a pair of Peregrine Falcons nesting on that building in the middle of a city, of our capital city here in Utah. And I would sit and watch them, and with binoculars, and watch the parents bringing food to the young. And it was just amazing. Getting into falconry, though, the idea of a peregrine was kind of that they were these distant things that you probably would never be able to fly. So here's kind of the background that you need to understand. There's a chemical, a pesticide, that is called DDT. It was invented, surprisingly, in 1874 by an Austrian chemist. But by the 1940s, it had gained a lot of popularity in use to try to curtail insect-borne diseases, things like malaria, things like typhus. And so it gained a lot of popularity and use by governments for that reason. But by then going into the 1940s and the 1950s, it suddenly began being used widely as a pesticide on crops. You have these farmlands, these huge farms, and just in mass, you had crop dusting, crop sprayers. This was going on. And it seemed to be a miracle chemical. The reason is it seemed to have no harmful effects on humans or plants, only on the insects. And if you go online, you can even find videos. It's ridiculous now to look back at it, where to show how safe DDT is, they'd have swimming pools of children playing and frolicking, and they have these people come in with this spray, spraying DDT on the kids in the swimming pool. Like, see, it doesn't even bug them. And it's like, oh my goodness, wow, times have changed. But it seemed to be okay. But in the 1950s, people started to be like, hey, I think this is having some adverse effects on the environment. And of course, the idea of environmentalism was quite new. But enough evidence that it was having harmful impacts in the environment led to, in the 1950s and the 1960s, the Department of Agriculture started to regulate and rein in its use to some degree. There was no Environmental Protection Agency until 1970. So, but by 1972, it was officially banned by the EPA here in the United States. So what was it doing? What was so wrong about it? Because it didn't seem to be killing large animals outright. But one of the animals it was most noted on was peregrine falcons. Peregrines were common all over the place in America in the early years, and they just tanked. By 1970, east of the Mississippi, the peregrine falcon was extinct. And west of the Mississippi, in the western United States, there were only 39 pairs known that were breeding. And what happened was the research that started to be done, spearheaded by Tom Cade at Cornell University, showed, it's not outright killing peregrines, but what happens is the bugs are eating the pesticide, little birds are eating the bugs, falcons are eating the birds, and by ingesting the bird that they kill, they are getting some of that pesticide in them, but it doesn't leave their body. It builds and builds and builds and builds, kind of like lead poisoning. Similar idea in one sense anyways. And it didn't kill the peregrines, but it impacted a lot of their physiology. It impacted how their body would handle things, including how it would build and construct an egg. So a mother's body, as it's making an egg, the way it deposits calcium, there's a structure, a way that it's supposed to happen, and it was not happening correctly. The eggshells were too thin. They were calcium deficient. And so what you ended up with is mom would lay a clutch of, 3 eggs, 4 eggs, and then she'd go to sit on them to incubate them, and she'd crush her own eggs. Or the eggs themselves had so much DDT in them that the development of the embryonic peregrine chick did not happen properly. You end up with eggs that just don't hatch. Stillborn babies, basically, right? Only in an egg form. And this was happening year after year after year after year. And so in a world of survival of the fittest survive. The less fit don't, but that's okay because everybody's having offspring to replace those gaps where there are open available resources to be had out in nature. Wasn't happening. And so peregrines, almost gone. Same thing was happening with bald eagles. You had DDT on the crops, goes in the water, goes in the river systems, goes in the lakes. Fish are swimming in it. Fish now have DDT in them. Build up. Bald eagles eat the fish. Now the bald eagles have DDT. So the same thing was happening to bald eagle eggs. And of course many other species, but I spotlight these two specifically. This was happening. And it was noticed. And it was slowly but surely being addressed. Even after DDT was eliminated in 1970, they found out it doesn't break down properly. It stays in the ecosystem for decades. So it's still going through predators. Yeah, there's no new DDT, but it's still out there in the waterways and the crops and in the bodies of these peregrines. And this is very important from an ecology point of view. We have what we call indicator species. There's certain animals, usually they're at the top of the food chain or in the waterways. So frogs are a good example. If you have frogs that are always in an area and they disappear, this is a canary in a mine kind of situation. Something's going on here. Same thing. If your top predators disappear, bald eagles, peregrine falcons, if they're gone, something's up. We need to look and find out what's going on here. And fortunately, brilliant scientists and falconers and birders of all kinds noticed. They watched. And that may seem old hat to us now, 2021, but back then, this is very cutting edge to understand this and to try to make the general public even care. So Tom Cade is like, at Cornell University, is like, we got to do something about this. Falconry was alive and well in the United States, but captive propagation, captive breeding of raptors was in its infancy. There's been a few successful attempts here in the United States, but it was brand new. But that was the way to go. Falconers had in their possession peregrine falcons that, sure, they flew and hunted in the wild, but they weren't daily eating wild birds that had DDT in them. So what you had is a population in captivity of falconers, of these pure, safe, breedable peregrines. So Tom Cade reached out to the falconers of the United States and said, look, hey, here's the situation. We're starting this program, this project, Project Peregrine. We want to save these birds. We want to pioneer and further captive breeding. Will you jump in and help? Will you donate your birds? And falconers were like, yes, we will, and we will help with the propagation. So at Cornell University and also at other smaller facilities around, you started to have this happening where peregrines were being bred in captivity. Now, through Cornell University, through the Peregrine Fund, I think it was 1972, I believe, is when they started the attempt. By 1973, they had their first 20 young ready to go. And by 1974, they had their first releases, which is really awesome. This is incredible. It worked. They had to pioneer all kinds of crazy things. Like they had to pioneer double clutching. Usually, if it's done properly, if falcons lay a clutch of fertile eggs and you take them away, they'll be like, well, let's lay another clutch. So if you do that, you can have a bird that would have only raised this many young in a year suddenly raising this many young. You've doubled the population. In some cases, you can even triple clutch. So there was ways pioneered like, okay, if we're going to do that, what do? We put these in an incubator and raise them. When they lay the second clutch, we'll let mom and dad raise these. What do we do with these? Well, they do things like they pioneered not letting the babies see any humans and do little puppets, a puppet of an adult peregrine to do all the feeding, so they would properly imprint on a falcon, so when they're in the wild, they would look for a falcon as their mate rather than a human. Makes sense. They pioneered techniques like this. And it worked. It worked wonderfully. The project itself got big enough. They moved to Colorado, and they eventually moved to Boise, Idaho, in what we have today as the Peregrine Fund. And I highly recommend you go see it. The Peregrine Fund is an amazing organization and a wonderful place to visit and support in any way you can. After 28 years of this work, the Peregrine Fund had bred and released 4,000 captive peregrine falcons. And because of that, on August 20th of 1999, the peregrine falcon was delisted from the endangered species list. That's why we're celebrating today. August 20th, 1999. Barely at the tail end of the 1900s, it was taken off the list. Now we're looking. Now it's August 2021, so we're like 21 years after or whatever. It's just like, wow, that much time has gone by. The Peregrine Fund took what they learned and utilized it to help other species, to help bald eagles, harpy eagles, Andean condors, California condors, Philippine eagles, the almost extinct Mauritius kestrel that lives on the island where the dodo bird once lived. They pioneered this, and they continue to do amazing work with captive breeding of species in need, both on-site in Idaho and pioneering ecology projects around the world. They have lots of need for volunteers in these projects, a lot of internships. So again, check out the Peregrine Fund online, and also be sure to visit if you ever get the chance. Check out in person, because I have some amazing birds for you to see there. So this is kind of a moderately positive emotional thing for me to say, because I kind of wrote about it in my book. If you haven't purchased my book, please do. It's called Trapping Essentials. You can go to Western Sporting Publications online and you can buy it. It's like $22, $25. But I wrote about trapping, how to trap, because nobody would ever write a book on it for various reasons. And I'm like, well, people need to know these fundamentals, so that's why I wrote it. But here, I want to read just a quick section at the end and tell you kind of a story of a situation that happened before the peregrine was delisted and I was practicing falconry. We were starting over the years to see more and more wild peregrines, just randomly. It was great, and it did my heart good. From being a little kid and only ever seeing them either if a falconer had a captive bred one, or seeing them up on the old Hotel Utah, where I told you about at the beginning they were breeding. And one day we were trapping prairie falcons, some friends and I, and we came across a peregrine falcon. And we looked through the binoculars, like, yeah, it's definitely a peregrine. And we we started like, well, is it a falconer's bird? Because it couldn't just be a wild one, right? So I had my lure. I started swinging my lure, and she was bobbing and looking like she was going to fly to the lure. So here's the general rule in falconry. If you see a bird with equipment on, or if you suspect a bird is a falconer's bird that, escaped or had something happen, you catch it and find out whose it is to make sure it's safe and return to whose it is. If there's any thought of that, that is kind of the unwritten rule among falconers, is we look out for each other and we try to find if a bird's lost. This appeared to be a lost bird because, again, she was bobbing and like looking like she was going to come when I was swinging that lure around. So we put out a trap, we trapped her, and here's what I said in my book. Let me just read this. It's nothing epic, but it's just fun to look back at a time way in the past before it was delisted. It says, the falcon flap... Okay, so we caught her on the pigeon. As I grabbed her, I realized this was a pure haggard peregrine falcon. Haggard is an adult. And a wild one at that. No bands of any kind. This was a truly wild hawk that had never been in captivity and hadn't been banded as a baby by a wildlife biologist. In that time, there was no such thing in my mind as a peregrine falcon in the wild without a band. Anytime you saw a peregrine falcon in the wild, look through your binoculars, it always had a band on the leg because it had either been banded by biologists at the nest or it was a captive bred bird that had been released. This was not that. This was a bird that it had come from wild stock and had reached adulthood without that. I'm like, this is just a wild bird. This is amazing. So I said, due to current laws and the fact that she was a haggard, we obviously couldn't keep her, so we reluctantly set her free. But the chance to hold a pure wild peregrine falcon is a beautiful thing. It made me happy to see one living successfully so close to my house. I see numbers of peregrine falcons every year while out trapping, but holding this one in my hands gave me hope for the time in the near future when we will again be allowed to trap wild passage peregrine falcons. I look forward to that time with great anticipation. Why does that matter? Why am I sharing this weird random memory? Because I'm on both sides of the fence. So many falconers that I know now who have had years of experience came into the sport after, or even long after, peregrines were off the endangered list. But this was back when they weren't. And we heard, hey, once they're off the endangered list, we will hopefully be able to have a wild take. And we do. I have had the chance to fly a number of wild peregrines now after my book has been written. And it is so wonderful to know that the species, I see them all the time. I see 2 to 3 peregrines a week, not out looking for them, just wandering. Just driving to work or just driving over to my brother's house. Yep, there's a peregrine. And I love that is the case. And and being able to train the wild ones. The peregrine I have right now is Jetafray. He is a tiny little wild Utah Anodem peregrine. He is such a gem to work with, to fly, to hunt with, and I've absolutely loved him. And I just think that is kind of the core of falconry, being able to trap or pull a young bird from the wild, train it, let it fly totally free and hunt, and doing that with a wild peregrine is falconry of the highest caliber. That is the art taken to its highest level for me, and I love that. So, but I want to share a different part of the story too, okay? So remember, the first part I want to share, August 20th, 1999, Peregrine Falcon was taken off the endangered species list. And it's a shame that we're not shouting that from the rooftops. Conservation is almost always a sad story. Well, we came in and built a dam and now this fish species is extinct. We tried to save it but failed. Wah, wah. It's always something like that, right? It's always sad. We tried and we failed. Here's Tom Cade, Project Peregrine, and countless falconers who jumped in and attended and pioneered these breeding projects and these breeding techniques. Saved the peregrine falcon from extinction, and it's doing great now. Why don't we spread that information all the time? Well, I want to talk about that. There's an interesting thing that happens that is I don't want to say it's unethical, but I think it's of questionable moral approach. And here is why. I think that if there are human-related causes, especially, I mean, I think we should look out for animal species. By the way, I got to admit, in some ways we're like, we need to save the world. We can't even look after ourselves on the one hand, right? I mean, humans are humans, nature's nature, things happen. Like, in some ways, it's so arrogant of us to say, save the world, it's Earth Day. But I am still very much a conservation-minded individual, and I fully support projects and programs to try to help these species that are in need, especially if it's a human-caused issue. Now, it's kind of funny about this because I mentioned this in other videos before. Nature tries to find a way to survive. And the Peregrine Falcon is a great example of that, right? They're bird hunters that want to nest near cliffs. We come in and build our giant cities that are filled with pigeons, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll nest in a city. I'll nest on a skyscraper. That is their way of trying to, it's a man-made cliff, and here's these non-native pigeons that are here. I'll hunt them. Cool. That is nature trying to find a way to adapt and survive. We don't have a problem with that, but it's interesting. When peregrine numbers tanked, and they started to sometimes interbreed with their closely related falcon neighbor, the prairie falcon. That's extinction insurance. They're like, well, I can't find a mate because our numbers are so low. Here's a closely related species. I'll hybridize, then I'm still passing on my DNA. And we maybe cause that problem to arise. Hybridization does happen anyways. It's rare, but it does. But we cause that to come into existence because of DDT. But still, it's interesting that we're like, nature must never change at all. And so there are many instances where the government came in and would like destroy the young of those pairs. In some instances, and a little more ethical, they would take the young and like, okay, we're going to give them to zoos or whatever to have, because we don't want these hybrids breeding in the wild. But it's interesting. Gyr falcons and saker falcons regularly hybridize in the wild and produce fertile young. So they do that too, or they're ready to cross over. That's not my point. My point, what I want to talk about is how do we get people to care about conservation? And this is where I'm talking a little bit about ethics. I'm going to say something. Hear me out. The peregrine falcon was never, ever in danger of extinction. What? What are you talking about? You just made this whole video saying we saved them from extinction. Hold on, hear me out. Think about this. What does endangered mean? Endangered species means this species, peregrine falcon, Falco peregrinus, is in danger of what? Of ceasing to exist. It will no longer exist. It will go extinct. Extinction. It's nowhere to be found on the planet. It's gone. That was never the case. Why can I say that? Because the peregrine falcon is a worldwide species. There's peregrines all over the world. Yeah, we had 3 subspecies in the United States. The eastern peregrine, which is a subspecies that is considered basically to be extinct. Here in the West, we have the anatoms, the red-chested, thin-barred anatoms that we have that are just such a joy to fly. In the Pacific Northwest, here in North America, we have the Peale's peregrine, much darker, largest peregrine subspecies, but all over the world. There's peregrines everywhere. In South America, there's the Cassini peregrines. Sometimes they have a coloration called a pallid Cassini, where they have kind of a whitish head and are super pale. Beautiful birds. There's old world species, subspecies of all kinds, like the black Shaheen peregrine that has like a pink chest and a black back. The red-naped Shaheen peregrine, which is a peregrine that is so red and cream colored and pale that it almost looks like a lanner falcon, and it's kind of filling some of those same roles. Almost every landmass, almost every continent and island, almost all of them have peregrines. I know New Zealand, Antarctica don't, but most others have peregrines at least passing through. There are more subspecies of peregrine than any other species of falcon. You know, most falcons will have 1, 2, 3 subspecies. Peregrines have a bajillion. So, as a worldwide species, the species itself was never endangered of being extinct. But it is true that the local peregrines here in the United States and in Canada, they were. Those subspecies and those populations, they absolutely were in danger of extinction. But in the interest of linguistic purity, if we're being very true to our definition, the endangered species of the peregrine was never an endangered species. But a country will classify it as endangered. Now, let me tell you how this trick still works with other species. We do this all the time as a way to generate the need for helping a species or for protecting a region. So here's an example. There in Florida, there's the swamps of Florida that were called the swamps and the bayous of Florida. And then it's like, well, we need to protect these in the wildlife here. So it's not a swamp, it's a marsh. And then it's not a marsh, it's a wetland. And it's not a wetland, it's the Everglades. Are they Everglades? Yes, but that sounds way more worthy of protection than we got to protect the swamps of Florida. No, we have to protect the Everglades. Well, how do we make that matter? Well, what's a species there? Well, there's a species of raptor called a snail kite. Kites are, there's kites all over the world. We don't have many kite species in the United States, but there are many species of kite, large and small. The snail kite basically exclusively eats apple snails, catches them in the water, has this hook beak, pulls them out, eats them. Snail kites in Latin America are everywhere, in mass. They'll even nest in colonies. Couldn't be further from an endangered species. They are not a species that really truly occurs in the United States, but they just barely tip of their range, barely bumps up into southern Florida. Barely. But really it's a Latin American species. So that population is very vulnerable and is in danger of extinction. But the snail kite is not an endangered species. Also, the snail kite does not inspire your desire. It doesn't inspire the heart and the imagination. So they changed the name in the United States to the Everglades kite. We must protect the endangered Everglades kite. It's an endangered species. Therefore, we must protect the Everglades. So it's not an endangered species, but that population is, and they gave it a new common name, Everglades kite, to inspire people to a good cause. So again, it's a little bit of question of ethics, but again, it's for a worthy cause. And of course, same thing with common names. You mess them around, like the California condor, which I love. Absolutely love California condors. If you ever see one fly, it'll move you to tears, especially if they're low. We have a lot of falconers in the United States. Some who even watch this channel who have been instrumental in helping save California condors. They are true condors, but all the old books call them the California vulture. Not a very inspiring name. And in the first efforts when they were critically endangered, trying to drum up interest, people were like, so what? A big vulture way up there goes extinct. I don't know that we care. But they're like, well, but it's actually a condor. Let's in the United States, let's refer to what it really is, California condor. And suddenly, condor. If you say condor, it's like, ooh, condor. Which, it's a big bird. I got a skull one right here. Well, it's the cast of a skull. It's very, very large bird. Okay? Amazing bird. And you compare that, by the way, to a bald eagle, it's like, very different. They're enormous. They're inspiring. They're worthy of protection. They're damaged because of the lead poisoning and the persecution we've inflicted on them. So yeah, we should try to save them. They're still not saved. But yeah, I'm trying to point out the fact that changing a common name from California vulture to California condor, or snail kite to Everglades kite, that kind of thing can motivate people for good causes for conservation. And peregrines are off the endangered species list here in the United States, as well they should be. And we should applaud the hard work and heroic efforts of everyone involved who helped bring that about. And I believe the reason we don't shout that from the rooftops is, again, because if there's still this public misinformation, peregrines are endangered, that they're endangered, people are more likely to care about the conservation of wildlife. But I don't think that's right. I think in this instance, we should celebrate August 20th, 1999 for what it is, a day where the hard work and sacrifice of so many people brought about this glorious day of declaring the peregrine falcon off the endangered species list. I know this video was a bit long-winded. I hope you still enjoyed it. It's some good back history to understand about this truly amazing species. And let me know if you have any questions about peregrines or falconry down in the comments below. If you haven't yet, please hit subscribe. It helps me build this channel up, trying to get it going and share as much information as I can out there. And as always, happy hawking.